It was the time when I visited a small village in India. As an agricultural research scientist, I have traveled to a lot of places, but this place seems to be stuck in my memory for probably decades to come. It was a chilly winter eve when I landed in an Indian village. I honestly had a weird feeling about this village. Even though the village seemed beautiful with lush green farmlands and a thick, dense forest that seemed to be a habitat for all sorts of Indian animals, the forest didn't seem welcoming. The people here seemed to be afraid of something in the forest. Who knows? Probably there was a ghost. Well, I decided not to let curiosity lead my way and continued with my research. One eve, as my research was still in progress, I saw a man, particularly a boy in his late teens, come to the village. He seemed to be an enthusiastic person ready to explore the world with all sorts of crazy adventures like those in movies. He approached me while I was in a small tea shop at the edge of the village and entrance of the forest. "Hey, mister, you don't deem to belong here," he said, voice cheerful. "True, young man. I am from Chicago," I replied in a tired voice. "Chicago? What made you come here?" he asked out of curiosity. "Well," I replied, "I am here for some agricultural research." "Seems interesting. So, how's your research going on?" he asked, taking a sip of freshly brewed tea. "Great," I continued. "I am almost in the verge of completing." "Oh, that's nice," he replied. Finishing up my cup of tea, I waved him goodbye and got back to my room in the house of the village headman. Well, you can't expect a whole luxury lodge in a small forest in the middle of the town, right? A few more days passed by, and I was almost packing up with my research. It was a cold eve as I sat by the tea shop that had now become my daily routine. I now feel so connected to the environment here that I don't feel like getting back to my home in Chicago. It might be from the rising sun peeping through the mountains to the chirping of the birds that outline the end of the day. Everything fascinated me. Just then, suddenly, I heard the voice that probably came from the forest. It was more like a scream. As I turned behind, I saw a man running out of the forest. As he neared, I could see he was a mess, as if he had seen something no one ever saw in life. In the blink of an eye, the whole village gathered. They asked the man what had happened. He looked horrified, hair messy, his clothes full of mud and ripped completely as though he had crept into a cave full of thorns. I could even see the cuts that were bleeding profusely and the thorns that had borne into his skin, causing deep wounds. His hands were trembling while gasping for air. "There!" He shuddered. "What's there?" I asked, a mixture of curiosity and worry bubbling inside me. After a few seconds of gasping, he continued, "I and the dev had been into the forest last night. Despite my warnings, he forcefully dragged me into the forest, saying that the story of the Blackwoods was nothing but a superstition of the villagers. Finally, unwillingly, I accompanied him. As we went into the forest, everything seemed fine. The forest was quite too quiet, to be precise. But then later, we started hearing whispers. At first they seemed faint, and as we went deeper into the forest, the whispers seemed to come from anywhere and nowhere around us. We tried to ignore them, telling it was our wild imagination. But they grew louder, more insistent, like the forest itself was calling us. Then we saw her, a woman standing among the trees, her back to us. She didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, pale and thin, with her hair hanging in tangles down her back. I called out to her, asking if she needed help. She didn't answer. When she turned around, though, that's when we realized we weren't dealing with anything human. Her face? There wasn't one. Just smooth, pale skin where her features should have been. That's when the whispers turned into screams. They weren't human screams, mind you. Something worse, something unnatural. Dev and I panicked. He dropped his flashlight, tried to run, but the forest wasn't letting us go. The trees started moving, twisting, their roots and branches reaching for us. Unfortunately, as Dev stumbled and fell, I knew he was caught. As I turned back, the ground itself seemed to pull him down, vines wrapping around his legs and arms. And all the while, the woman, or whatever she was, just kept coming closer, her arms stretching out, her fingers turning into claws. I swear I could see faces in the bark of the trees, faces that looked like they were screaming, just like the whispers in his head. They didn't just want to scare us, they wanted us to stay. By God's grace, I could escape, but Dev... He cried as he narrated what had happened. Little while later, everyone retired to their homes. So did I. The next day, as I was stuffing all my things into the car ready to leave, I heard people gossiping. I approached a man nearby, asking him what the matter was out of curiosity, only to know that the man who had escaped last night from the forest had now disappeared too. The only thing that was left in his house was Dev's camera. As I looked into the camera along with the others, we could see a few pictures. It was of Dev, staring into the lens, terrified. And behind him, well, the trees weren't trees anymore. They were grinning. Well, no one knew what happened to those two after that, nor about any of them who had gone into the forest. Probably they were now a prey to that face in the dark. As I retreated back to Chicago, completing my research, one thing I knew was I would never forget this incident.